good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. For us, it's the morning, so that's what I'm saying. So, anyways, welcome back to another episode in the conversation series. We've got Asher joining us from the flower farm in Maine today, which is exciting. And uh, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, man, my pleasure. I, I always felt an affinity for Maine. I've only been there like for a day or something, but I really loved it. It's a beautiful place,
It's
nice
a
part
pretty
of the
wonderful
world.
spot.
Yeah, yeah. You got lobsters and fresh water and salt water. It's all beautiful. Lots of trees and green. I quite like it.
Yeah, only place we've got mountains going into the ocean here too. Only place on the East Coast.
Right. Yeah, that's gorgeous. So I don't know a lot about the scene out in Maine because I know every state's different, and for us foreigners, it's hard to keep track of them all. But
Yeah,
sure it is for everybody down there too. The That you have given me a good look into what's happening there, and you sent me a recent High Times article about it too that helped shed some light. But I think it would be interesting for everybody to know how you got into it, what your pathway was to opening the flower farm, and what the regulations and bureaucracy look like in Maine.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, we got up here in 2012. My wife's originally from Maine, but we were both down around the Carolinas, like Western North Carolina for a while. She went to college down there and I was living down there. And we got up here in 2012 and we kind of I kind of burnt out of growing. I was growing down south and it was just stressful and I was kind of looking for a change and we came up here initially just to grow vegetables and flowers and we were just trying to run a small farm and Maine's a really supportive place for small farms and organic agriculture and there's a big focus on supporting local businesses up here. So we figured it was a good spot to come up and start farming. And once we got up here, we were looking around for some herb, and people said, "Oh, you can get a medical card," and we were like, "Oh, cool! We didn't know that." And so then we went and got a medical card, and I got a caregiver card, and we started growing a little bit in the medical program up here. It turned out my wife didn't even know, even though being from up here, that they had decriminalized in 1976. It was the second state after Alaska to decriminalize cannabis. And then in 1999, the voters approved a medical initiative by 61% margin, which is a pretty big margin. They're the fifth state to have a medical program in the U.S. And it's a lot like Alaska up here. It's a lot like kind of leave me alone, like keep to yourself, be a good neighbor. And so it's kind of like people to stay out of each other's business. It's pretty rural. Um, and so then yeah, they started with just a basic medical program that allowed people like six plants. And in 2009, it got opened up a little bit more with a ballot initiative. Maine's a state that has ballot initiatives, so you can get enough signatures and you can get something on the ballot up here, which not all the states in the U.S. can do. It's a great way to change laws if you're citizens and not a lawmaker yourself. And so it's how a lot of progressive policy has kind of moved through Maine. And Maine's kind of a state that drives national policy. One of our state mottos up here is Dirigo, which means first. And it's kind of people say as Maine goes, so goes the rest of the nation. So a lot of interesting progressive policy comes out of the state and trickles down into the rest of the country. And so in sorry, do you have a question?
No, I was just saying that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a neat small state. It's only about a million people up here in the whole state. So it's kind of like the whole state's kind of like a small town, you know. If you talk to somebody long enough, you realize somebody else you know in common pretty quickly. Um, but in 2009, there was a ballot initiative that established like a dispensary and caregiver program, and So it initially was 8 dispensaries for the whole state, and they just had them planned so that they would spread out and cover the majority of the state, which they did a pretty poor job of because it's a pretty big rural state. So people were still having to drive hours to a dispensary. And initially, 4 of the 8 licenses went to a group called the Berkeley Patients Group from California. And there was a little bit of people didn't really like that very much. The licensing person who ended up awarding the 4 of the 8 licenses to the one entity ended up going to work for one of those entities a couple years later. So there's been a lot of stuff like that happening as this is all rolled out. But it also opened up the caregiver program, which allowed every caregiver to sign up 5 patients, and you could grow 6 plants for each of the 5 patients. And so you had to have like their medical card, their patient card logged in, and you had to keep records of everything, and you had to have like your plants, each plant labeled with that patient's name, and you could grow for up to 5 patients. And so that kind of started the program as like a grassroots program. And a lot of people started growing as caregivers. A lot of people started getting medical cards. And we kind of started pushing it through. People started organizing and writing legislation. And every year it kind of started opening up a little bit more. We made it a little more comfortable for people, made little tweaks and adjustments, entirely grassroots. We've got a legislature up here that's very much like citizen legislators. Like my local representative here is an organic vegetable farmer, and he's a buddy, and I can go have a chat with him. He's a really reasonable person, and he'll sponsor bills for us. And he's helped us write a lot of bills and helped us, protect the program from corporate lobbyists and other people that will try and write bills also to restrict what we're doing. And so over the years, it started kind of, we all started organizing, we all started figuring out places to gather where patients could come and meet caregivers. And we started to, then the groups of caregivers started to organize and write legislation together and push legislation and push bills through the legislature to open up the program and make it a little more sensible from a business standpoint, make it a little more, easier for access for patients. We had some great doctors and great people that were advocates in the state. It's just really been a grassroots effort from the beginning with the medical program. And we figured out how to work it after a while. We started to have, you'd sign up 4 patients and you'd kind of leave the 5th patient as a rotating slot. And so you could drop somebody as soon as you sold to them, and you could sign somebody else up and sell to them. And we started to learn how to like push these rules a little bit. And then eventually there's a guy up here named Dawson Julia who started to push on whether or not we could have a storefront. And he opened the first storefront and started to challenge. The whole time the Office of Cannabis Policy was kind of saying, you can't do that, you can't do that. And we kind of just had to go for these things and then say like, well, are we going to go to court over this? Like, how are we going to sort this out? And mostly we ended up being able to just write legislation to make the things that we were starting to do legal and covered within the program. And that got us up to like around 2016 when there was an adult use ballot initiative. And this became the new way that the regulatory world and the corporate world started kind of coming after the medical program. And they initially, the rules for this program were written by the same people who wrote the rules for Colorado's programs. They were also people who are connected to metrics, track and trace software. They're a couple of them now are national lobbyists for like large alcohol and tobacco down in DC. And they wrote like hundreds of pages of rules, a very restricted program with metric, track and trace required, mandatory testing, and like very strict mandatory testing, like mandatory testing of every variety, like, very high barrier to entry kind of program. And so that program got filled by mostly big business. A lot of entities that were Wall Street backed type companies, multi-state operators like Curaleaf and stuff came in. and they kind of filled up the adult use program while the medical program remained small operators. Like our biggest license in the medical program is 30 plants or 500 square feet. And you're allowed to have up to 3 licenses on one property. So you can get to about 1,500 square feet or 90 plants. And that's kept it small, but it's allowed all these small businesses up here to really thrive. And it's as adult use has come in, it's been really interesting because the the regulators and the legislators, everybody who's been pushing against the medical program, thought that adult use would come in and just wipe us all out and outcompete us. And honestly, it hasn't happened. And most of the big MSOs have had to pack up and leave. And the small caregivers growing 500 square feet have put out such good quality that it's just completely held the market. And adult use has struggled to break in and even like catch up to where we are. I think we're still, I was just looking at figures, and medical in 2023 was 280 million compared to the 217 million in adult use. In 2025, medical was around 259 million, and AU is still trailing at 246 million. So as they've rolled out adult use, they thought it would just absorb the medical market, and kind of the opposite has happened. This last year,
Hmm.
we had 112,500 patients registered in the state, which is roughly 8% of the state's population. And even
That's amazing.
they've run so much propaganda saying that like medical cannabis is dangerous and it's untested and it's not tracked and traced and it's the Wild West. And still, even with all that propaganda running constantly, people are getting their medical certification and they're supporting small businesses because they know the farmers directly. They know what their methods are. They can, talk. They come into my little farm stand store at the end of my driveway.
Good.
They can talk to me. I can let them look at my grow. Like it's
They know you consume the product yourself too, you know?
exactly,
You're right
exactly.
there. So nice to have the connection with the grower for the people that aren't growing. I mean, I have a hard time understanding not growing your own because I really love growing my own. But if you don't puff very much, if you puff 5 grams a month or something, maybe it's just not your thing. But I swear I'd stick them out just for decoration anyway, just they're nice to have the plants around, right? But
Yeah,
most people would rather buy them. That's all there is to it. And it's whether it's adult use or medical or maybe prevention is medicine, preventative medicine. It could all be medical if it's preventative, if it's got some benefits. Who knows? I think there's a lot of people that benefit from it medically that wouldn't even realize that that's how they're using it.
yeah,
Like I think it's such a bizarre distinction, really. The adult use and the medical. You just think, okay, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You say an ounce of
totally.
prevention is worth a pound of the cure, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
laughter
and
is the best medicine.
even if you're just using it to take it easy, I mean that's medicine.
Yeah,
You're relaxing, you're getting less
de-stressing.
stress. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
medical
That's
was like, the way we had to start talking about it to get it to even be looked at to be legal. And I think, we're now stuck in this paradigm. And I think, many of us would be okay being called recreational, even though it is mostly medical. But, it's just become that the recreational is where the big money is and it's where it's really expensive to participate. And the medical is the grassroots program. And I mean, I think it should just personally just be legal, like tomatoes, but we're not
yeah,
quite
yeah.
there yet. And medical was our
Not yet.
inroad when we started showing, introducing legislators to children who were having hundreds of seizures a day, and then a few drops of tincture were completely stopping that. When we had people with stage 4 cancer sent home, and then we could bring them in after taking RSO for a few months and their cancer was gone. And you're just seeing these dramatic changes in people's poor health from this simple plant medicine, this just simple oil off of this plant. It really it moved lawmakers to really start to allow this to become legal and come out into the open.
Yeah, it's really progression, incremental gains sometimes, and it starts with the hemp, and then it's the medical, and then it's the adult use, and hopefully, eventually, like I'm jaded because of the Swiss years. When I went there, they'd never made the plant illegal. They'd made certain uses of it illegal, so you couldn't open a hash bar, for example. And
Yeah.
you couldn't. They didn't even want you to sell bongs and weed in the same store, but you didn't need a license to sell weed. You didn't need a license to grow weed. It was legal, not licensed. And it
Yeah.
was so I've been so jaded since then that anytime I'm like, oh, this is gonna be such a headache,
Yeah.
because the licensing and I've done them in various places and it's just like, oh, do I ever miss it just being normal? you know? So I hope we get there sometime. I'd hope by now we'd all be there, but it's like, you know, not how it's panned out in Canada. Like it's not like it was in the 90s in Switzerland, which
Yeah.
was, they just never made the plants illegal. They said, Swiss botanical research is huge, and we're not going to start saying you can't grow this plant or you can't grow that plant without a license. And we can make the use of the plants illegal. We're not going to make growing poppies illegal, but you know, even like heroin, they decrimmed and gave it to junkies in Zurich, so that if they went and like pushed a broom in the park, they got their 3 needles a day or whatever. So they
Yeah.
would. They had it wasn't worth people's while to bring it to sell because
Hmm.
there wasn't a market for it, because it was cheaper just to have the government give them pharmaceutical grade hard drugs for free than have them breaking into your cars every day and all that stuff,
Hmm.
so they're just so practical. They're
Yeah.
just like, yeah, this is actually much cheaper. We just buy a kilo a day and give it to all the junkies, and then there's no market for it and there's no crime around it. It's just basically
Totally.
like a welfare program, right?
I think we'd be a lot better off if people were on opium and not fentanyl. I think we'd have a lot less people dying, you know?
Oh
I think a
yeah,
lot
can
of
you
our drug
imagine?
policy is just so screwed up, and it's never made sense to me to make nature illegal. I think we need to focus on treatment a little more. I think we need to give people support, but when people are hard up, they're gonna try and feel better, and they're gonna go to whatever they can access. And usually pharmaceuticals tend to be a little bit more dangerous, I think.
Yeah, well, the black market will continually concentrate stuff to get the best value they can, right? So that it's easier to conceal. Not that they invented fentanyl. You can get fentanyl in every hospital. You get in a car accident, you'll be glad they had fentanyl. I mean, these things have a purpose, right? But if you consign them to the street market rather than letting people walk into a pharmacy and buy a known dose of a clean thing,
Yeah.
now now they're playing Russian roulette with mystery dosing. It's bound to be a problem. There's just no two ways about it. You either create the problem or not. If you create the problem, all you got to do to stop it is get out of the way.
There's a lot of money in the problem, all the nonprofits and everybody working with the addiction and the homelessness, and it's just siphoning tax money and paying executives a couple $100,000 a year to run nonprofits. It's kind of kind of gross.
The people that are living rough, they're always going to be looking for the most bang for the buck painkiller because they're
Yeah.
suffering, they're in pain. It makes sense, whether it was the cheapest sherry they could buy when they were winos 100 years ago or whatever, to
Yep.
whatever it is out there now and next week and next month, and it's always evolving, but or devolving, or who knows. Anyways, what are some of the favorite things you're growing out there? What's popular in Maine?
We're growing we're entirely sun grown where we are. I grew indoor for about a decade before I came up here, and since I've been up here I was so happy that I could just grow a field of flower. I haven't grown. I run a little bit of veg indoors and I maintain my mother's, but I mostly flower, well, almost entirely, aside from a couple little experimental tents. I'm flowering in greenhouses and outside. And so we're running, we have an internal depth curtain on one of our greenhouses so we can do 3 turns a season. Um, we run 2 depth runs and then we run a full term run. And I've been running through a lot of the classics. I'm a nostalgia chaser. I'm trying to chase all that stuff that I read about in High Times or that I would get occasionally see come across from collectors. And I'm just so happy to be able to run all these varieties. It really feels like a golden era for cannabis right now, being a grower in Maine. And we're running a lot of like chems and sours and um, all kinds of old stuff. Like I've been running the Santa Cruz Blue Dream a bunch lately. We're running. I've just got some of your that sweet pink grapefruit you got to me. We got that going in the greenhouse right now. Been running through a bunch of Paradise Pine from Huckleberry Farms out in California. They've got some real neat stuff in there, sort of similar to like a Mendo Perp. Like we got a lot of neat fruits and got some like I got one that I love right now that's got like some red wine kind of um just neat complex flavors out of it. Um but yeah, I am finding a lot of the like the chems and sours do really well in the greenhouse and we've just been running through, just had a great run with some Triangle Kush, some Gorilla Glue, just kind of trying to see what doesn't melt down in our really humid environment up here. I have a hard time with some of the OGs and a lot of the like Southern California kind of stuff. As soon as it gets into the humidity up here, it starts to struggle. So we've just been grabbing any great cuts we can get off our friends and trying to put them in the greenhouse and see if they survive. And a lot of them do pretty well. I'm really encouraged, you know? I think a lot of the policy has been trying to drive everything indoors. We're getting a lot of, like, ordinances against smell and a lot of, you know, legislators trying to bring forth policy that would restrict outdoor cultivation, and we've been able to hang on to it so far. And I think it's really important. And a big push we've done with the legislature here is just showing them that these plants do survive just planted in the ground, like a tomato. They don't need to be grown indoors. They don't need the controlled environments. We just need to like get back to the genetics that can survive and breed those together and rebuild this thing that's had to be forced indoors because we had to hide it for so long. And we weren't looking for the varieties that survive in a humid environment because we could control it. And we've just kind of bred away from it a little bit and we can get back there really quick. So really just looking for stuff that's hardy and survives a humid climate.
Music to my ears, man. I think that's so important that people make the effort to bring up the sun grown because that's where it started. That's where it started. These for the longest time. But the indoors is an anomaly in the genetic makeup of the plant that it's been selected for the last 40 years indoors mainly, at
Totally.
least the modern hybrids and stuff, right? But
Yeah.
once you start bringing it back outside, they're not used to it, and the acclimatization process can be a bit painful as you pick and choose. But that's the also the fun of it is getting to pick and choose. So
Yeah.
I totally love what you're doing because it's so true, and it usually a little injection of narrow leaf plants usually
Hmm.
can bring up some fungal resistance pretty quick. Those things are typically from jungle environments, and
Yeah.
they might have more resistance to hot climate fungal stuff like the septoria and pseudocercospora, these other problems that you don't get in cool climates so much, but like mildew, because the mildew is a bitch in cool climates. So cool, wet climates, that's mildew magnet, right? And you
Yep.
see pretty quick which ones can handle it and which ones can't. And it's better just to, dodge them. The ones I had that were the totally best mildew resistance I ever bred with something was my Sweet Tooth 4. And both parents of that were BX2, P1, and M1. And they were just two examples of about 1,000 plants from seed put into a cave for a week. and there was only two plants with no mildew, and I brought them out, and it was those two. It was a brother and sister, and they were already of a second back cross line of sweet tooths to grapefruit. So then I was like, oh, well, I used the male back to grapefruit for the sweet tooth 3, which was the third back cross, and then I let it hit its sister that was identical, where it was like really thick, dark green leaves, but thick leaves like cardboard paper almost. And then they just were just so hardy and resistant. They really didn't have a speck of mildew on them, and all the cuts that I'd forced into that bad situation, they were just coming out fuzzy, fuzzy with oidium or mildew, and those two nothing. And I'm like, oh, these two are going together because mildew resistance is pretty important. And you think of one of the worst things people can spray on weed, and they do it out of desperation because they're evil and don't care too, but is fungicides, and the systemic fungicides at that. So if you can defeat the fungus genetically, and there's never any need for those people even to spray the fungicide because they're not getting it. So
Yeah.
that alone helps a lot of people out, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's genetic resistance to some of those things is not far reached. Obviously, there's been lots of people working on it over the years, but it should become the standard. That, and I think we'll see that. I think the market's still relatively youthful in its legal format, and the guys like you that are bringing it back to the field are going to make the leaps and bounds difference, because you can do all the lab assisted breeding or gene editing you want, which obviously very different than just lab assisted breeding, but the selective breeding process alone, you know you get the
Yeah.
results, you'll get there, and it's still never going to be a substitute for doing a test in the field. you
Yeah.
know you can know which gene controls the resistance, and you can breed from, but man, if they don't stand up by themselves in the sun and wind and rain, then all bets are off. So to me, it's like throw as many in the field as you can and let Mother Nature thin them out for you, and then you pick
Totally.
what you like from what's left. you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
that's a ruthless way to be, because you might find one that, oh, this one smells absolutely fantastic, but it's not standing up on its own, and I don't want to stake my plants. I want plants that stand up.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
if you can get those erect types, like one example I remember, I had selected some, there was a couple phenos, or not phenos, but a couple lines from Sin City seeds, and I grew them out on the equator, and there was slime cookies and platinum delights were very erect plants. I didn't need to stake them up or anything, whereas the blue lime pie, it would just grow like golf balls on a vine, and they were just laying
Mhm.
on the ground if you didn't stake them up. They were really vine like bendy,
Yeah.
smelled
Like
great,
OGs.
tasted great. Impossible to grow it. Like screen of green, sure, you could totally do it.
Yeah.
But if you just want freestanding plants in a field that, they don't need to be monster plants if you're not limited by plant numbers. You
Yeah.
just need them to stand up on their own. If they're 3 feet and don't need stakes, that's a whole lot of labor saved. So
Yeah.
it's you always have different goals in different situations, but obviously mildew resistance will be a big one for you, and botrytis resistance.
Yeah.
And what's the latitude in Maine?
We're about 43, 44 degrees. And we're
Oh,
on the coast
beautiful.
here where we are, so we're like, I mean, it's a similar climate in Northern California. We're in the mid coast. We're about an hour and a half north of Portland, and so we've got mountains going into the ocean right here. So we have that weird Northern California kind of microclimate. Foggy mornings, and a good bit of moisture, but it burns off quickly. And we have big swings, so we're swinging. We were 30 degrees the other night and then 80 degrees the next day, and we're just getting big swings every day, morning to daytime. And it really brings out the quality. It stresses the plants a little bit, it pushes them, and when they're out in that environment, if they can survive, they really get super terpy, they, get delicious, they really have stronger effects, in my opinion. I hear that from a lot of people. A lot of people say that our flower is a lot stronger than the indoor flower that they get. And, I'm not doing anything special. I'm literally just putting the plants in the ground. I'm growing with compost. I'm just watering them with straight water out of the hose, irrigation water. We're not feeding
That's
anything
special.
extra. Occasionally a little top dress after stretched, and we're just kind of amending to a soil test, basic organic amendments. I'm just kind of trying to grow them the same way I grow a tomato. We also have a flower farm. The cannabis is only half of our farm. We also grow cut flowers, and we work with a lot of florists and floral designers around the coast. And we just want to be a diverse farm. It's just a crop we love, and we just see it as one of the crops on our farm. We don't want to just be a cannabis farm. We just want to be a well-rounded little community farm for our area. And
I
and
love
you
that.
know being able to, like, have our own retail, I think that was just huge. We've kind of pushed these bills through in a grassroots effort to make these into sensible businesses, and it's worked really well, even though they come for us every year and try and, put a million requirements that are super expensive on us. Like, the most recent push they came is all the testing and, the track and trace that they keep putting on us, or trying to put on the medical program. They kind of try to do what the adult use program is rules are written into, and trying to put that onto the medical program. And, like, the way I'm growing in my greenhouse, I'm growing 40 different varieties in my greenhouse. And it's not that I'm opposed to testing and qualitative testing and things like that. And I tend to do it anyway. I'll usually grab a few buds from throughout the grow and mix them together and do a survey test for pesticides, just so I can show people that my stuff's clean. But I don't really use any pesticides. So I've never failed a test. I'm not going to fail a test for that. But, I'm okay doing like one test, per greenhouse, just to show a survey sample of that. And that cost me maybe $500 per greenhouse run. But if I were to have to test every variety in there, that price goes to $20,000. And very quickly, it's not very efficient to run a 500 square foot business. And those are the kind of little things they're trying to tweak in the regulatory side that will just make us not able to be in business anymore. So that's mostly what we're kind of pushing back against. But we've been able to hold our own on it so far, and we've had some legislators that have really taken the time to understand what's going on, and have really backed us up. And I think at this point we've explained how metric is kind of a corporate takeover and somewhat unnecessary, well enough that most of the legislature is not gonna let metric come into the state, I don't think, at least in the medical program. It is in our adult use program. Yeah, yeah, we're just fighting this battle every day. I mean, we just had a big battle in the state, a few months back, a couple months back now, and they tried once again. This was like the 6th year they tried to put the exact same bill through that basically cut and paste the adult use rules into the medical program. And we held a big rally. We had one of the candidates for governor spoke at our rally. We had doctors and nurses and patients speaking at our rally, and it really swayed the legislature, and they got our back once again. They killed the bill. And then, we had about a week of celebration after all that. And then we were on DEA rescheduling. And now we've all got till June 22nd to sign up as a Schedule 3 drug manufacturer, or face some unknown we don't really know. So we're, just rolling with it as best we can, trying to survive.
Well, I appreciate your advocacy there, man. It's great to see, talk to the people that are really carrying the torch in every region around the world. It's a different battle, but it's all part of the same war.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. Um,
Those of us in it, we really think, we're holding a model here, because we've had this program going for 20 years. There's been no major public health issues. There's really nothing they can point at. All they can do is make up propaganda. They don't have any evidence of harms, of people, getting tainted product from the medical program. There's really nothing they can hold up as a problem. It's been reasonably safe. I'm sure there's some people that are not doing a great job, but consumers figure that out pretty quick and those people go out of business. And like the free market will sort itself out and it'll have a clean,
Exactly.
safe product if you just
Yeah.
let it be a free market, and
That's
there's
right. Exactly, dude. You're preaching to the choir. I tell you, the easiest way to get rid of crappy weed is let people sell their good weed. People
totally.
will find the growers and brands that they trust, and they'll say, "Oh, this other one's cack," and they'll
Yeah.
just avoid it until they're done. I totally agree. The market can be self-regulating at this point.
Yeah.
Just let people vote with their dollars, and they'll tell you who's got the right product and who doesn't. You know,
Yeah.
pretty darn quick, I think.
Yeah.
It's
So true.
just uh it's so crazy. When they say that when the market's controlled by regulators, the first thing to be bought and sold are the regulators. you know, and
So
that's
true.
and not just in cannabis. I don't remember who said that. I always have these great quotes pop into my head, but I can't remember who to attribute them to. But it's there's the older I get, the less faith in government ever get shit together.
Yeah.
I've really just about given up, basically. But when I see, people getting results like you in an area that's more amenable to, the grassroots, it's really refreshing to see that. Where
Yeah.
it seems to be working slightly more as intended, even though you still got to be on guard for the constant incursions,
Mhm.
of those who would make your life not work. So
Totally.
that's it's really heartening to see, man. I really appreciate hearing about your success there as a culture. It's really great to
Yeah.
hear. What are some of your friends' places that are good growers and good brands in Maine if people are passing through and want to try some different guys?
Well, I'm wearing my buddy's shirt here, Woodstock Pharmacy. I'd love to connect you with him. He's one of my favorite breeders in the state. He's just working out amazing plants and just pulling flavors and smells that are just mind blowing. I think he was bred fish for a while back in the day with his dad. So he's been at it for a while and is just producing amazing products. Some of my buddies at Skunkfoot Farms are doing a great job. Art and Craft Cannabis, they're doing a great job, and they do a lot of advocacy work up here. They've been placing well in some hash competitions around the country. We've got so many great cultivators up here, and so many people that are just really like winning comps all over the country. And I just think Maine's, for its small population, we're really holding it down on the quality up here. And I think it's just the effect of this free market of us being able to be creative, of us being able to run 40 varieties in one greenhouse because we don't have to, test every single variety. It lets us just run so much more diversity and run through so many more products. My buddies down at Hidden Forest Farm are doing a great job, and they're running the Culture Cup down here. It's been a real popular event that's been going. Yeah, there's so many good farms here. I definitely I recommend, just check out the medical scene. That's really where the best businesses are up here.
Very cool. Now, out of curiosity, I was wondering what are the prices like in Maine, both retail and wholesale?
That's another interesting thing, because the prices have stayed pretty stable for us up here. And I don't want to say this and have a million people move here because it's really like not that kind of market. It's
Yeah.
not. We have had a large influx of good growers from around the country. I mean, I myself, I grew up in Virginia. I married a Mainer. That's how I ended up here. But we have had some people come here, but it's just like it's not like you can roll in and just set up a giant business and take over and do. What it is it's like you can have a stable small business up here And I mean, I'm still hitting 15, 1600 on greenhouse, on depths, and
Beautiful,
it's it's
beautiful.
it's 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 held on solid, and I mean, retail, I'm getting like $25 an eighth, it's prices have held. It's stable, and it's
Beautiful,
held
beautiful.
through adult use opening up. Everybody, said, "Oh, that'll just crash it out," but it really hasn't, because people will pay for quality. And I mean, there's definitely 400, $500 pounds flying around the state for sure of, bullshit herb, just like beasters, just like we've always
Yeah, yeah,
seen.
yeah.
But if you're doing a
There's
quality
always
job, I mean,
levels to the market. Yeah.
there's people getting like, upwards of 2,000 on indoor up here. It's there's good quality, good prices, if you're doing a good job. And
Oh,
it's
that's
stayed
good. That's
stable because
nice.
it's a free market. Like the people who are pushing a bunch of crap and trying to just price everybody out, they go out of business.
No, it's that's also nice to hear that that the little guys can still make a living at it up there, because I think in a lot of places they're just regulated out of existence, really.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's
that's
so
that's
true.
really really nice to hear. Yeah, I am really stoked for you, man. I'm happy to hear that you've got a beautiful thing going there, and I love the diversity of the farm, and that it's not just monoculture cannabis, which is still fine, but if you can do it mixed in with a whole bunch of other things and have that, I think it just more fun to like to say,
Yeah,
go through and check your peppers and your tomatoes, and I like having a bunch of different plants, different
yeah,
types of cannabis plants, but also different types of plants entirely. You can have a
yeah.
section of orchids. It's all fun.
We've been running some like spinach as like an understory cover crop under the crop, and we've run a bunch of like our flower crops. I've got some like ranunculus going right under my cannabis right now. And yeah, we just play with all kinds of stuff. We were doing lettuces for a while, but they can get a little bit of botrytis. We're just having to deal with, learning the environment. We were growing a lot of outdoor for a while, but ever since the hemp stuff all happened and there was a big hemp push here, and we saw a lot more like septoria and leaf spots start coming in. So I've been growing a lot more in greenhouses now, and that seems to stop the spores from coming in. Every time I throw plants outdoors, that kind of septoria stuff, it'll just take down a completely healthy plant and defoliate it in, a couple weeks.
Yeah,
So
it
that's been
starts
a
at
little
the
bit of a
bottom, right?
challenge. Yeah,
The
yeah, just like
septoria splashes out of the soil. When it rains, it
totally.
splashes out of the soil, creeps up the plant. It's ugly.
Totally.
It's
And
real
it
ugly.
doesn't
Yeah.
seem to like I haven't found a single variety that's been resistant to Septoria. I keep trying ones outside,
Oh
and
yeah.
I just like everything I'm finding just kind of hits a point where it melts from it. Even a completely
If you
healthy, like great plant.
if you can get some good Santa Marta Gold or other really more equatorial stuff, that's where you get the resistance from it. Because
That makes sense.
I've
Yeah.
definitely seen like different blocks in the field trying lots of different stuff down in the tropics, and of course, the stuff that's never had to deal with it before doesn't
Yeah.
deal well with it. But the stuff that's had to deal with it for 500 years is pretty much impervious. So
Totally.
it's but that's it. But I didn't know you get septoria in Maine. I didn't know it was up there.
We didn't
That's
have it
interesting.
until like 2017, 18. We started to see it. It
Really?
really we didn't I didn't see it at all. I grew tons of outdoor. We'd grow fields with hundreds of plants because we'd set it up so that we'd have like fenced off areas and have multiple caregivers in one location. And so as long as it was all fenced, we could grow, a large amount of plants in one area. And we did that for a while, and we would grow monsters for the East Coast, 4 or 5 pound plants, like big plants for the East Coast.
That's
We
big.
can't
Yeah.
quite do what they can do out west. We have too humid of an
It's a
environment
long
for that.
season.
But
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it was we had a lot of great years like that, and then it just started coming in, and now the spores just seem like they're here, and it's we can't really quite get them without. I run a lot of greenhouses with open sides, and so we just having that cover over the top seems to stop the spores from really coming in. And if I see a few leaves, I'll
Keeps
just
the
pick
rain
them.
out.
Yep, keeps the rain, keeps
If
them
the if
dry.
the rain's not there, it's not splashing up on them.
Totally.
Because it just
Yeah.
splashes out of the soil. That's literally where it comes from. The obviously spores are everywhere, but I didn't. Yeah, that's a real shocker for me because I always think of that as really a hot climate stuff. But I know in the summers you get a hot climate.
Yeah.
What's your harvest window typically there? What's your full season for straight outdoor? What's your full season?
Plants start to flower here about second week of August. So usually we're pulling in like in October. Usually, and I'll run in the
Yeah. Okay.
greenhouses. I'll run unheated greenhouses into November, but I'm usually getting into the 20s by like November at night.
Okay.
Um, so I'll start to get some frost, and I need more frost hardy plants. But a few frosts, I used to grow down south, and we always grew a few outdoor plants for ourselves, and grew indoor commercially. And I was always scared of frost, but up here I've seen plants get completely frosted, completely covered in ice, and then shake it off in the morning as the sun comes out,
Yeah.
and they're fine. And as long as the variety is hardy, like the quality is fine. It almost like makes it a little better quality if they hit a little bit of a frost. So
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah. It's
surprised
kind of
by how
funny.
hardy they are.
And some more than others for sure. I've seen some that
Yeah,
when the frost hit them, they just all the leaves all didn't recover, whereas most of them they recover. And some of them really, like you said, they really bounce back. I think the only thing I can think of, because I'm pretty simple minded, is elasticity in the cells. Like maybe some of them have more elastic cell structures. I'm just guessing,
totally. Hmm.
but it's definitely it's really true, and I leave some out really late too. I think the latest I've left them is Valentine's, but they've been covered in snow a few times by then because I have a south facing porch in the backyard, so I call it cheater outdoor. Because before the rain starts in the fall, I pull the pots under the back deck,
Yeah,
and the sun's low in the sky, so through most of the afternoon, the sun's still coming in the back deck at them, but they're not getting rained on. But once the snow comes and it swirls around in the wind, then they get caked in snow. But usually it's just for joy. I leave a few out there late just to see how they do. Like, especially if I have some tropicals that really, they don't have a fair chance of finishing at 50 degrees north. So I'll just say,
hmm.
well, I'll just let it sit there, and still I go out and smell it, and I'll still hash it up once it's frozen. And
Yeah,
it's just so fun. Like, it's cold climate growing. It's a different creature, than every every region's got its own ups and downs and joys and challenges, right?
yeah.
But being up north, I find it's great for hash, you know. Rather when
Hmm.
you're down south, it's not great for hash, especially if you're trying to make it with screens, because if it's hot and humid, it's no good for screening. But if it's
Yeah,
cold and dry, it's fine. So once you got winter and it's all snowy, and you know you can get some nice cold temperatures and nice dry conditions. So
yeah,
and then it doesn't matter even if the bud's a little leafier and not your favorite bud as a bud, because you're really there for the resin.
yeah.
Is there more? I'd rather have more sugar leaf than more bracts at that point, because I know I'm just after the resin at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I had one shishkaberry freak I never released. I called it shishkaberry 4, but it stayed unreleased. But it was a plant that had fan leaves covered in resin, top and bottom, but no buds. At the top, it looked like a palm tree at the top, and then it just had one bract with seeds between the petioles of this palm. Like, it looked like a big palm tree, and it was that. So there was very few seeds because it was only like little pre-flowers,
Totally
between
like
the
a haze or
bracts.
something.
No, but it wasn't even like there wasn't a bud to pick. It was you could just pop the seeds out of these little, like, you know crotch rockets there. But that plant made so much hash, like, by weight, but it was all leaf, covered in sugar. So it made 4 times the hash of a regular shishka berry, and the regular
Oh,
shishka
wow.
berry was already my biggest dumper. But this mutant of it that was all frosty leaf, it yielded 4 times what the regular shishka berry did. I was like, Jesus. And it was just big bags of leaf. And I thought, man, if we could ever just grow wide open fields for resin, this would
Yeah,
be a great thing because you don't care about the flower. You're going to make it all into resin anyway.
for
And if there's
sure.
no flower, you don't have to worry about botrytis because you got no flowers. The
Yeah,
leaves don't get botrytis.
yeah, yeah.
It's so I was like, man, this would be a hash coup, this one. But honestly, that those seeds are still buried in Switzerland in a film canister.
Just got to
So
get a shovel and get
maybe
back
one
there.
maybe
Probably
one
still
day they'll
good.
get resurrected. Now they're buried in a Rubbermaid at a friend's place, actually. So buried in his storage unit somewhere. But someday we'll hopefully get those into a petri dish and try and bring them back. Who knows?
Yeah,
But that was a freaky mutant. But it was like, that's a strange hash leaf mutant which could have a future. But at the time, I knew it was ahead of its time. I'm like, nobody's gonna want this now because we live in a bud where bud is king world.
yeah.
If there's no bud, people are like, I don't. Just leaves to wash. Regardless, that was just me rambling on again.
I
Old
ran. I
guy
think I
barks at moon.
I think I sent you a pic of that adventure mix plant that I got from your grapefruit adventure mix. That one was
Oh, cool.
super frosty out on the leaves. That one's
Oh, good.
super frosty, like halfway down all the leaves. It stood up
Well,
on its own too. I went I set it up for trellis. I stuck some stakes around it, set it up for trellising. Never stuck a trellis on it. It held itself up the whole time.
yeah, I think that's a good trait. I like
Yeah,
plants that can hold themselves up. Yeah, it's okay to have ones that you need to prop up because you love the taste or whatever. Nothing wrong with
yeah,
that. Just being aware of it as a trait, I think, is something a lot of people don't even think about. That they just think
yeah,
about the THC and the taste and the look, the bag appeal of it, but you don't think of, well, if I really wanted to put a lot of these out, how you got to find ones that stand up by themselves. Just
yeah.
simplifies your life.
There,
That's for
there's some
sure.
there's some
More plants, less people.
there's some cool like hemp genetics out there. I've been messing with like some Colombians and Mexicans and trying to work them into some hemp stuff. And there's some really neat, like sturdy, good hemp genetics out there. And if we can kind of like grab those traits on one side and grab the flavor and the experience on the other side and kind of mix those. I definitely want to get away from trellises myself. It's a pain in the ass. I mean, I'm always going to have like the triangle kush, and there's some like OGs and things like that I love to run that are a pain in the ass, but I just love the smoke. And I'll always struggle and go ahead and put like 3 levels of trellis on them and whatever. But like, if I can grow without that, it just makes my life so much easier. And if I can get the quality effects and the flavor and the smells onto a sturdy frame, that's the ideal. I mean, that's the future. It's we have to go that direction. It's crazy to be growing all these scraggly floppy plants as commercial plants.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you could do it on tables indoors. It wasn't that much of a hardship. But even then, it is still a lot of extra labor.
It is.
If you're doing a lot, if you're doing a little room, it's no big deal. But if you're doing, large amounts, then the labor's a factor.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you've just got plants that can do it themselves, that's a huge savings. It's like plants that don't need much trimming, when you've got a great leaf to bract ratio and you don't have to. I had ones I've had that didn't require trimming or very minimal, where either they had a couple of petioles sticking out of the buds with decent sized leaf, but just those, and then the bud itself was just really flower. It wasn't really leafy. And then I've had
Yeah.
other ones where the sugar leaves were really short. So they were all through the bud, but they were really short. And when the bud dried, they kind of shrunk into it almost. And
Hmm.
then there's nothing to trim here. So whenever you can get to those, like once you've got the flavors you want and the acclimatization or resistance and that you want, boy, if you can get it down to don't have to trim it, that's oh, that just makes your day so much nicer if you can just take them off the line and put them in the bag. Can you
No,
imagine?
no
That's
trim
such a
jail.
savings. Yeah, I mean, you're just bucking them basically, you know?
I've got a friend up here who's been experimenting with grafting, and they've been grafting like, more difficult varieties, more disease-prone varieties onto hemp stock, and starting to get like the disease resistance from the hemp stock the same way people graft tomatoes. And so it grows on the rootstock of the more disease-resistant plant, but you get the flavorful, finished bud that you're looking for. I think that's going to be
Of
a
the
neat area
science,
to
yeah,
see.
that's super cool. I have a friend doing that in BC right now, not with hemp stock, but with he's just doing some grafting with it the last year or so. I've grafted vines, but I've never grafted cannabis before.
Yeah,
But it is kind of fun, you know? If you could get herbs like in Canada, federally, we're allowed four plants homegrown, but in certain provinces, they don't let you have any, and then that's being contested. So hopefully they all get it eventually. But even with four plants, obviously, we all like having more than four flavors in our collection, especially if we just grow once a year as
yeah,
an outdoor season, you know? But I
yeah,
thought if you know those trees with 20 fruits on them, you could if you could go to mainstream nurseries and have that where you can buy grafted plants that maybe have six different flavors on
yeah,
one plant. That would be
totally.
fun too, you know? So
Yeah, I love seeing
I
fruit
think
trees like that. They do fruit trees
yeah,
like
that's
that where they
super
have like
cool.
six
Yeah,
apples
I
on
know.
one plant.
Yeah, there was a crazy one in China I remember seeing a long time ago. It was like an artist who did it, and I think there was like 20 different fruits on this one tree. Like,
Yeah, and all the
and it
blossoms
wasn't
are
just
different
different
color.
kinds of apples. It was like peaches and apples and
Yeah,
lemons. I don't know what the hell he had on there, but it was a whole lot of different things, and it just looked amazing because in the spring it would have all these different, patchwork of blossoms and
totally.
totally unusual. So I think, yeah, that would be fun to have those as, you know, plants for people to put in their yards or balconies or whatever. And then they get each branch has a little hanger tag on it, and you could see, okay, this is my OG branch. This is your Gorilla Glue branch. You know, this is your Maine lobster branch or what do they call blue lobster.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
How's that? That's Maine trees. I've never tried that one. I've heard about it a bunch of
I
times.
haven't
You know.
tried that one yet either, but I've heard good things about it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it looked good. I mean, I just saw pictures of it and I'd heard it mentioned, and I thought, well, yeah, Maine. That was a Maine strain. I think we had to
Yeah, yeah,
talk
I think
about.
those guys do a good job. Yeah.
Good, right on, right on. I always thought somebody's got to cross it with one of the rainbow belts or something and have rainbow lobster because they're the. I love those rainbow lobsters. You know, you ever see those?
Yeah, yeah. I know
From
what you're
like
talking
Australia or something,
about.
rainbow lobsters. They're gorgeous. So I thought, yeah,
Yeah.
they got blue lobster. You got to have rainbow lobster now too. Anyways, send royalties too. No, it's all right. No, yeah. Well, anything else we should touch on?
Think we covered most of it. Yeah, we're just trying to hang on up here, We've got a good thing going. We're trying to hang on to this, program as an example for the rest of the country so people can point to something and say like, "Hey, there's a program where like small business can function and it's all working safely." And I was thinking as you were saying you were allowed four plants there, like, just through our own initiatives and pushes, we've gotten to a point where we can have six plants for our adult use and we can also have six plants for our medical use. So between my wife and I, we can have 24 plants just as
That's
medical
awesome.
patients, and I think that kind of thing is so amazing for, people who are using this medically, especially people who are extracting down to an oil. If you're treating cancer or you're treating some serious disease and you often need a lot of oil. I know people that were taking a gram or two of RSO a day to treat serious disease, and to get that kind of oil off of four plants is really difficult. So I think the more
Yeah,
we
it's
can
ridiculous.
open these smaller laws up, especially the home grow kind of stuff, that's something that we'll all die on that hill. I think every one of us would give up our business to make sure home grow stayed. Like, and
Sure.
anybody who tries to kill home grow, we're all gonna, boycott up here. It's just, I think we've got to stand up for our basic rights. I think we need, to be able to grow this plant and grow enough of it to work with it as a medicine if we need to. And I think that's an
Yeah.
important part.
Yeah, the whole number thing is so arbitrary. It drives me nuts,
It's so ridiculous, and
Yeah.
it's just like it's all about like diversion, and it's like is are we trying to legalize this or not? The only reason it's diverting is because it's illegal, and it or it's too heavily restricted. It's not free enough, and if you want to get rid of diversion, just like open it up, like free the plant. Nobody, there's not going to be anybody to divert it to. And like the biggest diversion is coming out of the biggest grows that are all metric track and traced. And we're always joking up here, like if you want to run a bunch of black market stuff, you need metric because it covers your ass and it makes it look like you're doing it legally while you're, still it's still like up to the person to honestly enter the data. Like none of these systems work. They're all just shells that are sucking money out of us all. And we just need to get to a free market. We just need to get to, you know, basic freedom for the plant. It's kind of ridiculous, and it almost feels like it's going backwards with all this rescheduling and all the alcohol and tobacco and pharma money coming in and trying to do a bunch of propaganda against things. So I'm hoping we can just have some sensible policy going forward and really open it up for people a little bit. I think it could be good for everyone.
Well, it's music to my ears, man. I really love your position on it and your effort and your passion. And I really look forward to visiting one day and having a smoke with you.
That'd
And
be
if you ever
awesome.
get out to BC, you're welcome to come here too. I've got a guest room and I'd love to have you.
Awesome. I'd love to. I really appreciate all the work you've done too with all your genetics. We've really loved growing your stuff over the years, and I'm excited to see you putting new seeds out.
Well, thanks very kindly, man. It means the world to me to talk to people that have grown them over the years. That's always fun for me too. Anyways, I wish you the greatest day and the best season, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so
Thanks a
much.
lot. All right. Have a good one.